Through my time at Polaris and peer teaching, I feel as though every experience has helped me to become a better teacher. Polaris showed Sam and I that teaching needs to be a well thought out process with intentionality behind every action. Even though we stumbled along the way, every step has showed me how to bounce back to create a better lesson for the next day. Creating the lesson plans that were intriguing but also challenging for students was a process that required an intense amount of reflection and editing. Collaboratively, I felt as though Sam, Ross, and I worked well to create plans that incorporated the students' interests. The ideation worksheets allowed students to rein in their ideas to make a well thought out plan. Though with giving students worksheets, I did come across that you need to be very specific on how students were to handle their work. I saw as only some students glued their worksheets into their binder, which became a problem when we needed to show their documentation. Knowing how to plan in detail allowed classes to go smoother down the road. Learning in detail isn't enough, which is what I found out on our second class, which was Chalk Day. This day showed me what happens when you don't communicate effectively with coordinating teachers and when you haven't set parameters with your students. Because I hadn't established connections and boundaries with my students, they ultimately weren't invested in their work, which showed in how management went for the rest of the day. This day helped me to understand how important boundaries and communication is for running a smooth class. Documenting was something that I probably had the most trouble with. Even being in a group of two, I often found myself forgetting to take pictures. I would get caught up in helping students that I wasn't giving opportunities for them to learn how to solve their own problems. But I learned very quickly that these students have some amazing stories behind their work. I really wanted to document the thinking and intentionality behind the work. And because students use elements of their own identity with their work, we had a wide range of artworks to document. There was definitely something different in each piece. Our class had a wide range of skills, personalities, and interests that it became evident that our lesson plan wasn't going to be the same for any two people. I was surprised to find how many students could have easily just worked with one lesson plan for the whole semester. But we also had students who would finish within 10 minutes. This threw me for a loop when it came to wrapping up lessons and moving on. I know now that even though it's nice that our students were diligent workers, that part of the artistic process is learning to edit. By having set deadlines, this allowed the class to flow at an even pace and ultimately allowed Sam and I to learn how to set up a class. Students showed me this semester their ability to talk and reflect about their work. At first, I didn't realize that our class could give detailed responses on their artwork. When I first asked questions when I talked to our class, they usually sounded like, "Why did you choose to make this?" or "What are you making and why?" These were really only surface questions that didn't require our class to take a deeper look into their work. I knew I needed to push further into why students chose to work with certain materials and what they wanted their work to say. My questions went from "What are you making?" to "Can you tell me about your work? What materials have you used? How would you use those materials and why were they important to your concept?" This allowed me to understand the meaning behind a student's work and ultimately helped me in planning ahead for guided questioning and assessment. Using plaster was ultimately a gift and a curse for our classroom. When we used this material, I've never seen students become more engaged with any other material. But with the good came the messy. Using plaster and art on a cart was no easy feat. Using this material required dependability between Sam and I, along with an intense amount of preparation and setup. If we hadn't had multiple stations with check-in points throughout the project, I know the day would have gone disastrously. Throughout using plaster, I found out how much preparation and advocacy was needed for using material such as this for art on a cart. Coming into this semester, I wasn't the most comfortable with lesson planning and writing objectives. But after peer teaching, I did feel more comfortable on creating objectives and knowing the purpose behind them. I was lucky in the fact that peer teaching, that I had a group that was self-sufficient and could and worked well collaboratively. Peer teaching showed me that even if you plan well in advance, things can and will go wrong. I initially thought that if I hadn't had all the answers myself, that meant that I was doing a bad job as a teacher. But ultimately, you want your students to be able to problem solve for themselves, and that's really what happened with my drawing and space class. Students were able to find an alternate solution with using an app on their phone that allowed them to take light painting pictures. I will know for next time that you can ask for student help and you can look to your students for problem solving. Learning to effectively critique and reflect on work was really like a fine wine. It does get better with time. The first time I heard my students talk about their work, it sounded like, well, I made a camo cube man, to which I would comment, well, why did you make that? To which their response would be, well, because I wanted to. This would go back and forth for a while. Nothing was being gained from the student or the teacher, but by having other students come in to describe what they were seeing in this work allowed students to describe the intentionality behind what they had created. By having students describe what they were seeing in others' work, this allowed the artist to come in to describe the intention behind their piece, which led to a more reflective critique. Which really brings me to my closing. I know that from my time at Polaris, I have become a better teacher, and I understand the importance of art advocacy because I do realize that not everybody sees the purpose behind what we were doing. Seeing the growth of these students and their investment of the project was a true joy. From my different experiences with both my 4th and 5th grade class at Polaris and peer teaching, I learned from the problems that arose and became a better teacher for it. Instead of looking at mistakes as a negative, I now see that every hiccup was a learning experience and that I can use when I'm a teacher of my own classroom.